Hi, I'm Zephyr, and I am grateful for some rain that came today. Today I'm going to talk about how to make a Bowdrill kit. Bowdrill is one of many historical methods of starting a fire using friction. I have a demo, I will link in the description, that you can watch of me using a Bowdrill kit. This kit in particular, there are 4 pieces: fireboard or hearthboard, spindle or drill, handhold or socket, and your bow. Things that make my kit a little bit unique: for one, I've got a way over-engineered bow, and I have a rock for a handhold. I like this. It has a lot of advantages. It's pretty much frictionless with the top of the spindle, and I'll get into why that's good. It's also heavy, and it's really hard to make in the field, so we're gonna make one out of wood. So the way that the Bowdrill actually works, the bow string wraps around the spindle like this, and it moves the spindle back and forth when you pull the bow back and forth. This in turn causes friction against the fireboard, which causes heat. The friction causes small particles of the wood to burn, mostly in the fireboard, but also in the spindle, and it collects in this little notch. The spindle will rub against that coal dust that's collected, and it will eventually ignite into a little ember. So for today, I'm going to use these 3 tools: my hatchet, my knife, and my saw. The only tool you really need is a knife, and need is even arguable there. I have made kits completely from scratch without any tools, but it's a pain, so we're going to use tools today. And I'm also going to use Paracord. In my opinion, pink is best. You obviously can make string from natural materials, but we're not going to go into how to do that today. We're just going to use this nice Paracord. And then I've got my wood. This is going to become our bow. Part of this is going to be our handhold, and then these 2 pieces are going to be our fireboard and our spindle. These are the only 2 pieces where the type of wood you use really matters. The lighter the wood, the less dense it is, the easier it is for it to burn and ignite. Basically, what you want is a type of wood that is light, airy, and burns easily. And you don't want it to have any resin left in it, which means that if you're going to use any sort of softwoods, that is to say, trees that have needles, they need to be long dead so that all of the sap or resin or whatever is gone. Today I'm going to use basswood, which is one of my favorites. It is a hardwood, but it's a pretty soft hardwood. Other good materials are white pine, which is actually what this fireboard is made out of, white cedar, which is what this spindle is made out of. You can also use box elder, or I have used red cedar before, but it is a little bit trickier. There's a lot of materials. The main key things, again, that you're looking for are that it is light and that it is not filled with resin, because you want the spindle and the fireboard to make as much friction as possible, and resin makes things smooth. You also want the spindle and the handhold to have as little friction as possible. So that's why you want your handhold to be something hard. We're going to use a nice hard wood. I don't actually know what this is, but it's very heavy and it's very hard, and it should work just fine. Rock obviously is great, because you want all the energy you're putting into it to just go between the board and the spindle. You want as little of it as possible to go between the spindle and the handhold, because the handhold is only there to keep the spindle in place. So there's all the theory out of the way. Now let's get to actually making it. We're going to start with our board. This piece is a little bit big for a fireboard, so we're going to split it a little bit, and I'm going to make it, just going to split off this back edge here that had the bark on it first. And just neaten that up. And it's also pretty thick. It's not that it can't be a thick board, but I like them to be kind of in the medium range. So I'm going to thin it down this way a little bit as well. You can do this with a knife, but make sure you have a sturdy knife if you're going to do that, because I've seen knives break at the handle. All this shaping work you can absolutely do with a knife. It's just a little bit faster to do with a hatchet, which is why I'm using my hatchet. You also don't need anything to look perfect. This is not going to be a part of a house. It doesn't need to be a perfect board. You just want it relatively flat and even. That board is enough of a board. Next, we're going to make the spindle. So this piece is going to be round in the end. So I'm just going to split off a little bit to shortcut the carving process. All right, now I'm going to carve this into a round. All right, so this is enough of a dowel for me. Now we are going to point the ends. You're gonna pick which end is gonna be the bottom, which is gonna be the top. It doesn't matter which is which, it just matters that you decide. The top is gonna be pointed in a longer fashion, kind of like a sharp pencil. Like that. You want that tip to be as centered as you can make it, but don't fuss yourself, it'll center itself in the end. The bottom is also gonna be pointed, but it's gonna be a blunter point. You can see that's a much shorter point. So we've got our board and we've got our spindle. The spindle, by the way, in terms of width, I won't say that there is a correct width for the spindle. The thinner it is, the less friction, which means it's easier to move, but it's gonna create less heat. The wider it is, the more friction, more heat, harder to move. I like a middle zone. I like my spindles to be about the width of my thumb at the widest point, but especially for folks who are smaller than me, because I can kind of brute strength my way through things, you might want to make your spindle a little bit skinnier. I've seen some people with like Sharpie width spindles and it works for them, so experiment, see what works best for you. So now we're gonna make our handhold. You want something that is about the width of your hand. I'm gonna saw that. There we go. Now I'm gonna use my knife and split this thing just a little bit so that one side is kind of flat. You can see I'm barely splitting, just a teeny bit off. Perfect. If you want to have a comfortable piece and you have any straight edges, it can be nice to just round those out a little bit. There we go, got myself a handhold. That's 3 out of 4 parts. Now the bow. Obviously you're really just tying a piece of string to a stick, but the string will slip and you don't want that. The string's tension needs to be just right. So what we're gonna do is we are going to carve some little notches at the top and bottom of this stick. So to do that, you take your knife perpendicular, hold it at an angle, rock it back and forth, and then right next to that mark, rock it back and forth again, and a teeny wedge will come out. And you're just gonna keep doing that until you've got something that will hold a piece of paracord in place, which, especially at the top, you wanna be careful about not thinning it too much because you wouldn't want it to snap off. That's good to me. So now I'm gonna do the same exactly opposite. And there we go. That'll hold paracord in place at the top. Now we're gonna do the same thing at the bottom, though I'm gonna make a slightly bigger notch at the bottom because it's a wider stick at the bottom. So here's my notch at the bottom. Here's my notch at the top. Now let's put the paracord on. So the length of the paracord should be the length of your stick and a half, roughly. This stick that I'm using as my bow is straight. Some people prefer a curved stick, some people like a straight stick, some people like to over-carve their sticks. It doesn't really matter. It's again one of those personal preference things. The only thing that can matter is length. The longer the length, the more revolutions of the spindle you can get per stroke. And that's good, but you don't want to overstretch your boundaries. I find a good rule of thumb is kind of out to your fingers from your armpit. This stick is probably even longer than I need, but that's fine by me. I also know some people like really short bows because they're very light and manageable. So again, experiment, find what works well for you and go with that. I am going to tie the top of this first, and I don't really want this to move much. If anything, I want it to get tighter, but I don't want to overcomplicate my knots. So I'm gonna do a clove hitch. At the bottom, I'm gonna tie it. For tying it at the bottom, first I pull it tight, then I loosen it up a little bit, because remember, you're gonna need to be able to wrap your spindle in here, and you may need to adjust how tight you make it, but we'll do that when we do that. Because you often will adjust this, because each spindle is gonna be a slightly different size, and paracord stretches, and lots of other factors, tie a knot that you can undo. I like to do a good old-fashioned square knot. It's not, again, the sturdiest knot. It can slip, it can come undone, but it is very easy to undo, and it is very easy to redo, so that's why I like using it for this. So let's see, did I tie this the right tightness? The way you can check is you want it to be a little bit hard to get it in. Bottom is gonna go inside the string and up, and then it's just gonna twist around the string once. And it's gonna look like that. I make it look easy. You will practice this and it can take ages to actually get it to go in because the string should be tight. You can kind of check if it's tight enough by letting it go like that. And if it spins, then it's probably tight enough. This is probably gonna need tightening in the end, but I'm fine with it for now. Here comes the part where we figure out our holes and notches and whatnot. So the first thing you're gonna do, take your knife, find roughly the center of your handhold, and you're gonna poke your knife in and twist it about a little bit. That's all. Now, the finished handhold is gonna wanna have, you know, a hole that's at least as big as this rock. It's gonna have an even bigger hole. But that's all you need to start, because you went and made your spindle nice and pointy. So that little pointy tip can catch right in there, and it's not gonna shift. Now we're gonna do something similar for the board. Pick where you want your first hole to be. So kind of put your spindle down and then move it around so that you get about 1/4 to 1/2 inch from the edge of your spindle to the edge of the board. So I think that's roughly right. Poke it in a little bit to have a mark. And again, just gonna take your knife, make yourself a small little divot. That's all. That's all I start with. And you go, okay, now let's carve the notch. No, now you need to know how to use the dang thing. So now I'm gonna talk about some technique. We've got our 4 pieces: handhold, fireboard, spindle, bow. I'm gonna explain this as a righty. If you're left-handed, I know it's not as helpful, but reverse everything I say. My left foot is gonna go on the board, kind of the arch of my foot is gonna go right on the board, right next to where my hole is. Like, you want your foot to be nearly touching the spindle. And want this leg to be kind of a straight angle. My right leg is gonna be behind me, as straight behind me as possible, so that it's out of the way and I can be stable. Now the spindle needs to go in the bow. So remember, bottom, which is the shorter, blunter side, up inside the string, and then twist it around. And that gets planted right into the little divot you carved. And the handhold gonna go right on top. It's really important that your left arm is locked against your shin. That is gonna give you a lot of stability, because when you pull the bow back and forth, your hand is gonna wanna wobble all around. And you can also keep it in place by kind of leaning down on it. Use your body weight to your advantage here. And then start slow. It's probably gonna squeak it first. You wanna move the bow slowly, especially at first, and just get a feel for it. I'm trying to get as long bow strokes as I possibly can, because each time I change directions, there's a stop for a fraction of a second. And when I stop, it cools down. So the more motion you have, the hotter it gets. I gotta keep the downward pressure, and I've also gotta keep my bow straight. If I start going at angles like this, you can see the string goes up and down. You're gonna end up having it pop off, and it's gonna be super annoying. So the straighter you can keep that bow, the better off you'll be. I can already feel the string is getting looser. I'm gonna add some tension by kind of twisting it a little bit between my fingers here. All right, that's quite a bit of dust created, but because we don't have a notch, we can't get it cold. But now from all that burning, we have a nice, perfectly round hole. Now we can carve our notch. You'll also notice that the handhold itself has burnt a rounder hole, and that the top has gotten rounded. So what you're gonna wanna do is sharpen this back up and carve this down a little bit more, because this is far too shallow for it to actually catch anything. So you need this to burn down a little bit more. So I'm gonna do that real quick. Hi, Goose. So I didn't do much. Hi, Goose. Carved this up a little bit, not quite as pointy as before, doesn't need to be. And I carved a little bit more of a divot in there so that it has more to catch on. At this point, you probably won't need to burn it again. If anything, you may want to stop it from burning more by adding things to smooth it up, but we can get to that. Now we need to carve the notch for this. Now, there are different ways of carving a notch. You can carve it, meaning, you know, use your knife. You can also use a saw. I like to use a little pocket hand saw. It's just faster. So to do it with a saw, you're gonna find the center of your hole, make a mark, just so that you know where that is. And then you're gonna start sawing just to the right of it at a slight angle. And then you're gonna do the same just to the left of it, of your center. Again, slight angle. And should get something that pops out. There you got a nice little notch. You may need to widen it out. This one's a little bit narrow, but try not to make it any deeper than the deepest it should be is the center of your hole. I think that's good. let's see if we can get a coal with this guy. So I tightened up my string a little bit, and I grabbed one of the pieces that we split off earlier. I'm gonna use that to collect the coal dust that's gonna drop, and eventually, hopefully, coal that we're gonna make. And here we go. So I can feel that up top, it's starting to get a lot more friction than I want, because it's harder and harder to spin at all. So here's how we're gonna solve that. First, I'm gonna make sure as little wood as possible is touching the top. So I'm gonna keep my little burnt part intact. I'm gonna carve away all around it. And then we're gonna add an ingredient. So there's lots of things that you can use to smooth up the top. One of the best materials is pine pitch. I've got some here. Doesn't take much, and you can just dab that right on the very top and just sort of mash it in there. You don't need much, so I'm gonna actually save some of this excess. Other things you can use though, cheap soap works great. You can also use needles from any coniferous tree. They'll have some resin in them. Some pitch pine needles here. You just kind of break them up a little bit, put them at the top, and they can help to smooth it up. Pine pitch is one of the best materials. That's what we're gonna use. So if you look, made my hole a little too close to the edge, and especially at the corners, this can happen. So didn't get a coal, which is fine, because now I can take the opportunity to show you the other way of carving a notch. So I made this one a little bit further back from the corner. We're gonna use our knife for this, and here's what you're gonna do. Again, find the center line, and you're gonna make a mark on the side. Now, you're gonna go at the corners. So similar to how we made the notches in the bow, you're gonna dig your knife into the corner, rock it back and forth until you reach the center line. Then go to the opposite side, and you'll cut out a little wedge. And you do that at the bottom. Carve out a little wedge, that's what it looks like so far. And you're gonna keep doing that till you're at the center, and you can carve that out. You're just gonna keep carving away, little bits at a time, till you get to the center of your hole. All right, so here's the notch. Now we'll try and get a coal again. Here's the time we're gonna get a coal. I always say, once you think you have a coal, go for 10 more seconds if you think you can. In this case, the choice was made for me, but as you can probably tell from the smoke streaming up from this, we do indeed have a coal. So you can be more patient than you might think. I could let this sit for a couple of minutes and it probably wouldn't go out. So move slowly, don't panic, gently tip it onto your board or whatever you're using to catch it. I think I actually made multiple coals by accident. Here they are up close. Tip that into your bundle, gently press it together. You don't want to squish it, but you want to make sure it has fuel. Make sure when you're blowing into it that it's above your face. You don't want smoke streaming in. Give it a nice controlled directional breath. Hopefully by the end of this, you've walked away with a Bowdrill kit and some idea how to use it. The only thing I can say is practice. You may get it your first try, or you may not get it until your 1000th try. It took me 3 years to get my first coal. If you do faster than that, congratulations. And if you don't do faster than that, your persistence is still worth it.